and I was like, okay, let me see what it is. I'll give it a chance. And there was this gratitude letter assignment to yourself. You read a letter to yourself of what you're grateful for. And it was the first time that I did that, and I realized how like you see, when you see something on paper, it's tangible. It's there. It's right in front of you. It's your perception. And so I went through that class, and my whole perspective changed. Like, I'm a very dominant person, and I'm very, social. Like, I think too fast sometimes, and so it slowed me down, and it made me realize that there was several other perceptions around me. And so, like, at any given moment.
That's how you ended up. Positive psychology. A professor said, take a class. Happiness. Was it happiness? No. Science.
So.
And that's it. You got it from there.
Well, then, no. I fought it every step of the way. I did enter the program. I only needed, I think I needed 12 classes to graduate to get my master's. Okay. And then when you get into a new program, you have to take their classes. So I fought every step of the way because they were like, I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
And so, but then halfway through, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
It clicked for you.
And
okay.
And it has such an impact. Positive psychology, it focuses on the future. And mental health and social work and clinical psychology focuses on the past.
Right.
And so I was like, this is genius. This is amazing. And the impact it had on my life and the people around me. I have better relationships with my family now. My children. The children are the exception to the rule.
So you could see how positive psychology became transformative in your life.
It did.
Absolutely. That's amazing. And with that, I'm going to just hold you off for a minute. I'm just going to check in because it's 1 o'clock now. So I want to honor everyone's time who's joined us on time to start the webinar. But I'm going to give it just another 2 minutes because we still have some people signing in. But I wanted to just go ahead and say Assalamu alaikum to everyone that's joined. Thank you so much for taking your time out on a Saturday afternoon to be here with myself and my colleague, Rebekah. My name is Saman. I'm with BeyondChai. I'm the marketing director. And this is actually the third series that we are presenting today in our monthly webinar series in which we tackle different issues that we think would help people as far as their relationships, as far as our mission, which is to connect single Muslims for marriage, and also to really help people that have already connected with someone to understand what are the next steps in the relationship. So this Saturday, I'm honored to welcome Rebekah, who's the director, of coaching with BeyondChai, and she has this really amazing topic that she thought of, and it's the name of the webinar is Effective Communication with Your Match. And we see this over and over again about how people are thinking one thing and saying something else. And so I'm really excited, Rebekah, to learn about the different communication styles and how I can also use positive psychology to strengthen the relationships as far as communication. So with that, I just want to tell you that Rebekah has a master's in positive psychology. She's been working really hard, and currently she's pursuing her PhD in forensic psychology. So thank you so much for bringing your expertise, and we're really excited to learn from you. One other note is that there is a handout that Rebekah has preloaded. So if you go on the right hand of your screen, it'll say handout. You can go there and preview that. And Rebekah, you're going to cue them when they should be looking at that. Also, we have a poll that Rebekah is going to be doing, and I will be launching that when it's time. As always, please feel free to start writing down your Q&A in the Q&A section, and we'll get to that portion towards roughly around 1:45. I'll pop back up on the screen to start reading out some of the questions. So without further ado, I am thrilled to hand it over to my colleague, Rebekah. Thank you.
Thank you, Saman. And I'm so happy to be here. This topic, communication, is really important. It has been it comes up in every single conversation I have, every coaching session. Communication is a big, the biggest topic that comes up, and it is probably the major issue when it comes to finding a match, having a good relationship, having a bad relationship. It's the number one issue. So the first thing I want to start with is the communication style. So I broke it down to 5, and there's multiple different communication styles, and I'm going to break down the 5 that I have compiled with all that I've gone through and researched. So the basic 5 are dominant, influencer, conscientious, and steady. The 5th one is a mixer. It means you're a mixture of the 4. So just for so if you're a dominant communicator, and I'm going to ask a question after I explain what each communication style is. If you're a dominant communicator, you're decisive, you're efficient, you're intense, you're results oriented, you're competitive, and you tolerate risk. If you're an influencer, you're outgoing, you're enthusiastic, you're persuasive, you're relationship oriented, lively, and optimistic. If you're conscientious, you're systematic, logical, reserved, process oriented, cautious, and risk adverse. If you're steady, you're cooperative, relaxed, patient, support oriented, friendly, and thorough. The mixer is you're taking some from each, and for the most part, I'm dominant. Primarily, I'm an influencer, but I do tend to, because I've known and I've researched and going through the master's in positive psychology, I've learned that I've taken a little bit from everything. So I would pick influencer just because it's my primary communication style. So if the reason why I want you to understand your communication style, because if you understand how you're communicating, you can understand that there's other communication styles coming back at you, and you can find a way to, I'll give you some tips and tricks on how to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and have Saman do that poll. I would like to see what kind of communication styles we have in the room. Okay. Now I'm going to give it just another second or two. So, Saman, is there a way that we could show that poll when it's complete? Okay. So, whoa. Please forgive me if I'm going through the system, clicking too many buttons. So, okay, so I wanted to show the poll of what kind of communicators we had in the room in the webinar, and I can't seem to do that, but if we can get that up, then we will go back to that. So the next step is you know your communication style. So you go through and you work at understanding how to communicate.
I just wanted to say that I don't know of a way that I could share that, but did you see that on your screen?
I did.
Poll?
I did.
Okay.
Poll.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem. I would like to see if I can find it before the end of the call. I will share it. So you figure out your communication style. So if you understand how you're communicating, then you can move on to the effective strategies of using that. So the next part of this is, okay, so how I remember when I'm going into a group of people or when I want to communicate effectively. Majority of the time with my family, it's a little bit different because we're more relaxed and not as, more precise. But for relationships, for new things, for new communications, finding a match in the business world, in whatever situation where it's new, I always have this. I learned this a long time ago. I remember this code, Alt-Control-C. And the reason why I do that is because if you look at there's a handout that I loaded, and I don't know if, can you guys bring up that handout that I shared?
Hey, okay, so I'm not sure where Rebecca went, but what she was asking for the attendees to do is to go to the handout section onto the right and pull up the handout that she shared. You can just hit preview on that, and I think she was going to walk you through some of the things. So we'll just give her a second to come back on. And if anyone has any troubles with that, you can ask me in the chat.
I apologize.
Okay, and she is on. Okay, so I told them to pull up the handout that you had populated already.
Okay, so if you guys go into the poll, you can see it shows on my side. You can see we have 3 influencers, 4 mixers, 2 steady, 1 conscientious, and 1 dominant communicator. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I can see it on that. So 9% are dominant, 27% are influencers, 9% are conscientious, 18% are steady, and 36% are mixers. So onto the handout. In the middle of the handout, there's a circle, and it says communication. And so this is basic. This is called acceptance and commitment training. And the beginning of this, I'm going to go on to that part in a minute, but communication is a big, huge pie, and it's 6 pieces of pie. This is how I look at it. And the biggest piece you get 2 pieces to come out, and that is trust, because trust is such an important part of communication. It is, they are so interdependent. They're both the foundation for each other. You need communication to create trust, and you need trust to create communication. And there is a link that I would love for you guys to look on trust, because I'm not going to be reviewing trust, but Frances Frey, she's a professor at Harvard Business School. She teaches in a TED Talk, she teaches how to build trust and rebuild trust. And that is such an important message. And I think it was an amazing stepping stone for communication. So if you guys, I'll load that link in just a moment. But in the communication pie, if you take out those 2 pieces of pie and give that to trust, then you have 4 pieces left. And that's part of the Alt-Control-C. So the first part of communication is active listening. And, she, in that TED Talk, Frances, she says that you have to listen, you have to be in the moment, you have to be present. And then that's part of positive psychology, is being present in the moment, and not focusing on anything else. And cell phones, electronics, they need to be removed from the situation, because the moment you bring something else in there that's going to take your attention, you're not in the moment. So that's called active listening. And you have to constantly remind yourself to be in that moment, and to understand that that person is, you want to be vulnerable and open, and that person is sharing something with you that's important to them, so that you need to make sure that you're in that place with them. Because the only person you're responsible in communication is yourself. You can't be responsible for what the other person is doing, but you can be responsible for being that in the moment person. So the L is language, and language is such a huge part of everything. This is how we communicate in the world, is language. A quick story is, in 1999, I went to Pakistan. It was the first time I'd been out of the country, and nobody spoke English, and I didn't know Urdu, and so I was like, how am I going to communicate? And so I smiled a lot, and I used hand gestures, and finally, like within a couple of days, I started learning words. Like I had to communicate on their level. I had to communicate because nobody communicated on mine. So I had to be open and active and in the moment to learn and to be able to communicate with everybody. So that was a really amazing way to see that, okay, communication is so important. So, but not only is it language, because different cultures, different language barriers. My husband and I grew up in America. He grew up in Pakistan. We communicate completely different. One things that mean something to him mean totally different to me. So it's just, the tone that you put in your language, the body, how you put your body in space and time, it all matters. You have to be aware and cognizant of where you're at in your language. And so if you're speaking to someone that has a different language, then you have to understand that they have different nuances, and you have to be accepting of that and not take it personal. You take the personal out, you be open and vulnerable, but you don't take, them against, that what they're saying and how they're saying it is not an affront to your culture just because it may mean something different. So the language, and then the T is the trust, Alt, Control, C. Control is control. You have to control every aspect of your communication. You have to control, you need to trust somebody to communicate with them, and you need to build trust with them. In other words, you need to help them trust you. And the 3 points that Francis Frey talked about on trust was authenticity, logic, and empathy. And she said the biggest wobble in trust was empathy. And so, authenticity and is more when you're in the work world, because you're your real self with the people you love. But are you your real self with a person that you're meeting and trying to see if you're going to match with them? You have to be that real self, because if you come across as somebody else, eventually that real person is going to come out and you've built something on something else. So when you're trying to make a connection with somebody, you have to be authentic. And the logic is your point is you want to come across, you want to convey, you want to communicate something, and you need to make sure that you're conveying it in the way that person can hear it. Because like I said before, you're at the end of the day, you're responsible for communicating your way, for you to communicate the way they need to hear. And I know that's a little bit confusing. So if you have any questions on that, please feel free to write the question. And like right here now, here's the perfect example of communication. I'm tongue-tied. I don't like being behind the camera. I'm being my authentic self. If you all were here in my room, it would be a little bit different. But it's weird being behind a camera and talking to a computer. So please, forgive me if I'm wobbling a little bit. So ALT, controlling your environment, and then the last part is the C, the compassion. Communication requires compassion. If you cannot communicate, if you cannot have compassion, you cannot communicate, because compassion is, where we get our empathy. Compassion is where we get our trust. Compassion is where it's what separates humans from animals. It's that heart, that feeling inside of us. So the compassion is what I wanted to show on this handout. This is how we do compassion training in the positive psychology world. So that communication is so important. It's the center of this diagram that I shared. Now, if someone, Saman, if you want to, or if you can tell me the answers to the questions, if someone wants to walk through this, or if everybody wants to give some feedback, I can plug it in. I have filled out what you're supposed to do, is you're supposed to start in the, hold on 1 second. You're supposed to start in the bottom right, well, my left, your right corner, and you're supposed to, okay, so we have good relationship. This is what we want. We want a good relationship. And so learning compassion is like, okay, what are the positive thoughts and feelings that hover in your mind when you're thinking about a good relationship? And if you guys would like to be interactive on this, just add like what you can add those things, and I'll write those in. I wanted to be able to do it as a presentation, but it wouldn't let me do that. But so if anybody wants to add to the chat, can anybody chat? We can see, okay. So I did one of these yesterday with a person, a volunteer, and I'll just go through with that. So basically it looks like this at the end. But, you know, the words that came to, so positive thoughts and feelings surrounding good relationships. The words that came up were content, meaningful, reliability, happiness, trust, and comfort. And so those are the positive thoughts and feelings that surround good relationships. So we want to create those about when we're trying to build a relationship or start a relationship. We want to have those feelings present and be aware of them. It's easy to, you know, on the flip side of the negative thoughts and feelings that create a bad relationship. So there's a question, what are some ways we can make sure to be in the moment of a conversation is to have an automatic reactions? See, this is the biggest, you have to put everything else away. You have to come to the conversation willing to listen. You have to put away the electronics. You have to put away which I put away the electronics, but they still go off. You have to put away everything and focus and sole focus on who you're talking to and what you want to communicate. That's your focus. The moment you bring something else, if you're coming to a conversation with some other things on your mind, you're not going to be actively listening. So one of my children, I'm not going to say who, when I ask them a question, if they're doing something, if they're busy, they're hyper-focusing on something, they're amazing. But when I ask for something, I'm like, can you pass the pepper? They hand me a bowl. This is like not being present in that communication. And I'm the biggest, you know, because I'll be working and I'll be hyper-focusing, and I will, you know, shake my head yes when my 12-year-old knows I'm busy, and she'll be asking me if she can go do something that I would say no. So you just have to be in that moment. That being present in the moment is reminding yourself, I want this relationship to be good. I want it to be meaningful. I want this person to trust me. Let me be right here, be present. So on the flip side, you know, when you don't feel like someone isn't present in the moment, you're going to feel pressure. You're going to feel anger. These are just the words that came up for one particular person. Lonely, you know, you get resentment and frustration, or you feel disconnected because, you know, they're not there in the moment. And so when you feel those things, you're like, okay, I'm feeling resentment. So you need to say, hey, I don't feel like you're present in this conversation. Or I don't feel, not that you don't feel present. It's like, do you need something? Do you want to talk about this later? You know, let's revisit this at another time. Because then you say, okay, I want to trust you. I want to respect you, but I know that you're not in this space right now. Let's reschedule or let's redo this. And you have to give that other person a chance to redeem themselves, because, redemption is human nature. We can redeem, we can make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. We're going to make 1 million of them. I've made 1 million mistakes in my life. I keep on making mistakes, and I've asked for forgiveness, and okay, how can I make that mistake something that I learned from? And so the ideal is to replace those negative thoughts and feelings with the positive thoughts and feelings, because then you get out of that ego and id fight of negativity. So you bring your thoughts and feelings back to the positive side. And you can still, that's why Frances Frey talks about building and rebuilding trust, because you're going to have to constantly do that for the rest of your life, in a marriage, in work, in having children. So we have a question. Are electronic devices the most common distractions to having fruitful conversations? They are. The distractions are, like when my husband uses his phone at the table, I get so frustrated, and I know he's listening to me, because that's his style. That's how he listens more effectively, is when he's focused, when he's looking at something, and because he's an auditory learner, and I know that about him, and I'm compassionate, and I understand that, and I'm like, okay, let me take that. But I really want him to look at me and, have a discourse. That's my style of communication. But I have to understand him, so we have to come to meet in the middle, the compromise. And so that's a constant action on each other's parts. My responsibility is, okay, I know he's listening to me. He's answering me. If he shows me, if he breaks that trust and he didn't hear what I said, then I'm going to say, okay, now I understand. But I have to forgive him. I have to trust him again. So I have to rebuild that trust with him. And on his side, his responsibility is the same as mine. We have to both, work together to make that trust happen and to make that communication more valuable. And then we need to talk about, what we did wrong. So then the next step of this, because here's one already filled out. I'm just showing you guys. So this part is, you're going to replace these feelings over here with these feelings, positive. You always want to go back to the positive. Then you want to go up to, then the flow goes up to negative behaviors resulting from the anger, the frustration, the resentment, the loneliness, the pressure. So when I get frustrated, I have an outburst. I'm like, fine, you're not listening to me, and I hate when I have outbursts. I don't like them. They make me feel so uncomfortable. It's not how I want to handle it. But when I get to that point where I'm extremely frustrated, you're not listening to me. And I really have to take a step back and say, okay, I'm not in this conversation proper right now. I need to take a step back, calm myself down, ask for forgiveness, and move forward. So, the loneliness that, that word, these are just words that someone came up with. There's other words and there's other feelings that people have. And I'm just giving examples of what, I went through with another person. And it was just because it was just a really good understanding of communication and how we can make this flow and how we can use this tool, this accepting that we have these feelings and then committing to changing them. So I'm going to get to those questions in a little bit. I just want to go ahead and finish this out. So resentment creates that body language of, if I'm going to talk to you like this, can you guys see that I'm not going to be open? When you cross your arms, that means you're closed off from the conversation. When you're open and towards the person, that means you're in the conversation. So when you look down and you see yourself closed off, you need to be conscious and open up and let go. Even if you're on the phone, even if you're, no matter what you're doing, you need to be like, it's being self-conscious and being understanding that going back to that being in the moment. Because the moment you feel isolation or withdrawn or resignation, that means that you're not in the conversation. That's your responsibility. It means you need to get back to those positive feelings and behaviors. So if you get to if you get past those negative thoughts and feelings and you get to the negative behaviors, then you have to create behaviors to replace those. So the outburst, I replace with empathy. Okay. And then I have to ask for forgiveness. Okay. I'm going to be understanding of myself. I'm going to understand that, what happened. I did it. I accept that I did it wrong, and I want to move on from that. So then I give myself empathy, and then I'm hoping and praying that the person I'm communicating with will give me empathy back. Like, okay, I understand. Okay, she made a mistake. Let me give her another chance. Let me rebuild trust with her. The benefit of the doubt, I have to give the other person, if the other person has an outburst, I have to give them the benefit of doubt. If I have a bad tone, then I can say, okay, wait a minute, how am I talking? Am I listening to how I'm saying? Is this right? And usually when I have a bad tone, I use humor to replace it. I say, okay, hey, that didn't come out. When you're on a call with customer service like Verizon and they're really making you mad and they've charged you for something, then you're like, okay, let me, something else could be worse, and I'll joke about it. This week I joked about my husband. We were at Honda. We had a really bad experience with Honda dealership, and I had a bad tone, and he's like, nope. And he had such an amazing, soft-spoken, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We'll wait for your call. And I was like, so we joked. I'm like, okay, who's actually teaching the right communication here? So it's all about replacing all those negative behaviors with positive behaviors. And once you can do that, so what I do is I have a little card and I write down my behaviors. Knowing my behaviors and knowing what my go-to issues are, then I know, okay, that when I get really frustrated, I have it in my notes on my phone. And then what I do is I go in and I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? How do I need to replace this word? Because in the moment when you're angry or frustrated or mad or lonely or feel resentment, you're like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And I have this little cheat sheet and it looks a little bit like this, but it's on my phone. And so I'm like, okay, I have little words that I use, little affirmations that I use. Okay, when I'm mad or when I'm frustrated, I give myself words to help me shift gears. And that's what we're constantly doing, is we're shifting gears. Communication is all about, being in the moment, shifting gears, actively listening, and communicating to the best of our ability. And the only person that can do it is yourself. You can't expect the other person. You can hope and pray and hope that trust is there, but you're not responsible for that other person. You're responsible for yourself. So there's a couple of questions here. Honey. Okay, wait a minute. Hold on one second. Let me go back down. So, okay. I'm going to ask a question to the group. Are there other mannerisms that are commonly taken as negative distractions? And if you could answer that, what mannerisms, there's things that people do in my life that frustrate me, but I don't know that they distract. What distracts me is not someone. My distraction, it's personal for everybody. My distraction is if you're not looking at me and having a conversation with me and communicating with me like eye to eye, then that's a distraction. A lot of people look around. A lot of people. So that would be a distraction but I have to, that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is making sure that I'm in the moment, because the moment you eye contact with somebody, when they're nervous or when they're overwhelmed, they will look away. So they're not avoiding the conversation, and they do want to be in the conversation for the most part. They're just nervous, or overwhelmed by, that's just a defense mechanism, is when they look away. So the next question I've seen is, so the next question is about texting versus talking. Texting is not a form of communication. It is a, hey, I'm going to be home in a minute, or it's giving directions, or it's, texting is such an ambiguous, non-invested form of communication. So you cannot trust it. There's no trust, there's no tone, there's no communication regarding text. So if you want, the biggest advice on that is, we have a rule that we like to implement at BeyondChai, and it's the 3-call rule. Call, you have to talk. We recommend video chat. You have to connect with somebody, and you cannot connect with somebody through text. It doesn't happen. It's a meaningless, there has no meaning. Even with family members, it can become ambiguous and misinterpreted. So I highly recommend that you do not text, that you call, you meet in person, you communicate completely, as a person, not on electronics. The negative thoughts that a person has about the process towards the person they are speaking to. So those negative thoughts are controlled by you. So you determine how you control those negative thoughts, and you're the one that has to replace it with your positive thoughts. So I said sick several times, and that's a nervous okay. If you feel like they're not there in the conversation, then you can address it. If that bothers you, and I tend to kind of, this is my personality. Do you have something else that you want to talk about? Is there something bothering you? I'll try to get their attention. I typically use humor. The sky is green today. Have you noticed that? And then they're like, wait, what? So, a lot of those words that the other person is using is because it's their issue. And, so if you want to choose, like, if that person cannot communicate with you, if that person, says, and can't find a way to, and does those mannerisms that don't connect with you, then there's no connection. You need to determine if that's a relationship that's worth your time and your heart and your compassion and your understanding. So there's a good point. Interruptions midway of someone speaking. I have a really big habit of doing this. Because I'm thinking too fast, and I have to constantly ask for forgiveness, because it's not that I'm not listening. It's like, oh my God, that's a great idea, or oh my goodness, I like that. Well, wait a minute, what do you mean? So having that person, if you have that trust with that person, if you built that trust and have that understanding, then you use that trust to say, hey, we're kind of on a different page. Let's restart this conversation. Do you understand my point? And you ask them, you put them in the communication seat. So if they're interrupting, I've had a couple of my friends, I'm like, hey, if I interrupt you, if I overtalk you, please tell me and redirect me, because, and they're like, oh, we know, we do it all the time. So I don't even know they're doing it, but they are. I do recognize that I do it. I have to be very mindful of that. So we are at the 1:37 mark. So Simone, if you want to do the question and answer.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few questions that are still running on this chat, so I'm going to go ahead and read them out to you.
Okay.
Sadia asked, if you want to talk to someone, how do you bring it up? Like, I would like to talk to you, or can we talk? And she mentioned that she thinks that men sometimes run the other way when a woman says that to them. So what is some advice that you can give? And I know Shafqat sort of asked that same question when he was saying about the text, that he's been wanting to initiate possibly phone conversations, but the women are just on text. So for both genders, how would you frame it so that they can get people to get off of text and start talking on the phone?
So the first question, how you talk to people, like you have to find a connection. I can find a connection with anybody. This is something about me that I didn't realize until recently. When I go out and talk to people, or when I'm, if someone's calling me or texting me, I find a connection with that person. I find that connection. So, okay, so if this match, if Shafqat, if he has a match, or if he has someone that he's interested in, he's like, hey, I don't have conversations by text. I would love to either arrange a meet or a video chat with you. You know, these are the times I'm available. When are you available? If you keep it closed in and saying, hey, this is my parameters. If they accept those parameters, then they're worth that next step. If they don't, then they're not going to be in the moment and be able to communicate, because texting is, they want to stay ambiguous. That means he was right. There's no commitment in it. But the biggest piece of advice for finding a way to want to talk to someone, for both male and female, like Saman, you know, we both, like, when we met, we both do research, and I found that, like, we were so involved in talking about research when we first met. Like, I found our connection. That's what that's how I do. And you found it with me. I don't know if you realized that you were doing that, but we had quite a few connections. And that's what I do in every single conversation, is you find the connections and then you go on those connections. So if that person's from the same area as you, or that person has your same favorite food, like however that conversation is starting to come up, or however you met that person. And if you're within BeyondChai, and if you're in a match, your matchmaker is going to say, hey, this is what you have in common. And that's when you start, oh, I hear you're from this place. Let me tell you about this. If you can find that connection, I believe I can find a connection with anybody in 30 seconds. We have the same color eyes, or we have the same color clothing, or, I like their shoes. You can always, it doesn't matter, male or female, you can always find a connection.
So onto that point, the next question, Shafqat said, I tried, to connect to them, and I'm assuming he put some parameters about a phone call, but he said that they responded by saying that's next level for me. So what would you kind of say to that? And I think that it's becoming really common nowadays, where people just want to carry the conversation on text and not jump over to the phone call. So how would you, again, would it just be about framing? Would it be about, okay, if that's next level, then maybe this is not worth a match, or?
Right. So I would not answer the text. I would call and leave a message and say, hey, I don't communicate by text because it's very ambiguous. I would love to have a conversation with you. Please let me know. Call me back when you have some time. That's just a point blank approach. And I know that some people don't want to do that, but I don't communicate by text well. And so I have to do that for myself. That's for my own peace of mind. So for his peace of mind, he can, if they text him, that means that they're thinking about him, and they're, that's next level for them. But for him, first level for him is to connect and to talk. So, hey, this is my first level, and he can say that. That's next level. Okay, well, this is my first level. I need to make sure that I connect on a verbal or physical, face to face. I want to connect with someone and hear their voice, and that's first level for me.
Awesome. Okay. I think he affirmed you by saying exactly. So I'm going to go over to the question and answer portion, and as you guys have more question and answers, please go ahead and populate that section. This question is from Kainat. She asked, what can we do when we follow these steps but still don't feel like we're coming to a resolution? Is there a conversation about moving forward or coming to a resolution?
So in my life, this is something that's a constant research. This is constantly evolving. When I was, so in research and in school and as a social worker, there was always, I had to have a resolution. And sometimes those resolutions are forced. You just disconnect from the conversation. If it's not going anywhere or if it's becoming volatile, you just disconnect. And you say, okay, we need to revisit this. We need to come back to ourselves. And when we can reschedule another time with calmness and maybe bring in somebody, maybe bring someone else in to that conversation, a neutral party. Because then you have that neutral party, saying, hey, this is your side and this is their side. But I think that before that, those two people can communicate, say, hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. I don't know where to go in this conversation. Can we resolve it later? I think there's not an avoidance. It's like pending it and putting it aside and getting your bearings back and coming back to it. Some things are never going to have a resolution. Mm-hmm. People are going to have to agree to disagree. I have a really good friend that we're totally on the opposite spectrums of religion, opposite spectrums of politics, but we love each other and we communicate beautifully because we respect each other's point of view. We don't agree with each other, but we agreed 15 years ago to agree to disagree. And then we laugh. We use humor. Humor is our biggest asset in communication.
Okay. Well, I don't see another question, but kind of going off of some of the questions that I'm seeing, I would like to pose this to you. And Sadia had mentioned, from a woman's perspective, and I feel like Shafqat mentioned from a men's perspective, does it matter which gender is initiating these parameters? So whether a female is getting a text and then she's saying, I don't want to communicate through text, or whether a male is doing it. Sometimes there seems to be some confusion. Because I'm a woman, I can't be the one first making the phone call, or vice versa. So I want to hear your thoughts on that. So
there's a double standard on both sides there that I've noticed over the last year. A female would like a man to take the first step because then that shows decisiveness. But then there's on the other part of that, well, I want to be able to reach out if I want to, I want to be able to reach out and not be judged. Because some men will judge, oh, this woman is aggressive. That's weird. But some men will like, well, oh, okay, she's taking the ball into her, own hands and starting this. So this is a case by case basis. There is no perfect answer to this because men have their own perception, women have their own perception. At the end of the day, the perfect match, or the person that you're going to be with is going to accept whatever you do, however you can communicate. They're going to find a happy medium or a compromise in your communication style. And on the other side of that, we just have to keep on changing the conversation and saying it's okay for a woman to reach out. It's okay for a man to reach out. It's okay for someone to say, hey, I don't want to text, or hey, I should be able to text. It's what works for them. If another person is able to do the texting and not take it as ambiguous, then that's okay. It's whatever works for that person's communication style.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I have another question here from Nawaz. He writes, I saw a couple of persons online that I am interested in. If I approach them, do I have to communicate to both parties that I am in touch with another person? If so, how do I communicate this? So what he's saying is that, if I understand correct, what he's saying is that he's talking to a few people that he's interested And does he need to communicate this to the other party? And if he does, how does he communicate that?
So Nawaz, if the person that you were talking to was in the same situation, how would you want them to tell you, or would you not want to know? So whatever you feel that how you would want to know, if you don't want to know unless you're connected and unless it's going to the next level, then that's your personal. But typically when you feel like you need to know, there's no double standard in this. If you need to know if that person's talking to other people, then you should be telling that person. That's being your authentic self. And that's part of the trust and building foundation. So if you really want to build something, honestly, talking to one person at a time is less complicated. And, you can put your sole focus. It's that going back to that being present and in the moment. If you're talking to 3 different people, how are you going to keep them straight? There's nothing wrong with it per se. There's nothing against it. But honestly, if I was talking to somebody I wanted one person and focus on that one person, because when you try to, I have 4 kids, I cannot focus on 4 kids. I have to separate them. Okay, because it gets so confusing. Those are my children. They're pieces of me. So having 4 different people that you're interested in having a relationship with, that's going to be overwhelming and confusing. And they'll know, they'll see, because they may talk to you about something and then you forget that you talked to that about that. So it just gets so overwhelming and complicated. So my initial advice is one person at a time, because then you can be present and in the moment.
And also get on the phone or a video chat, right? Yeah? Okay. Okay, so I have another, it seems like someone is asking something on chat. Let me go here. Okay, so Shafkat says, I usually tell the other person if they want to talk to me exclusively, they need to make that clear. So I guess that's setting up the parameters of communication is what Shafkat's doing. What are your thoughts on that, Rebekah?
I think that's very clear. If that's the case, because if you're just talking to people to make friends, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. But then when it becomes, hey, wait, I'm interested in you for more than a friendship, then you need to stop with all the other friends and focus on that person, because that's not the friends. But you cannot, if you're talking to, let's say, Shafkat, you were talking to 3 different women on the interest of marriage, that's putting your attention in 3 different dimensions. And if you would want them to tell you, if they were talking to 3 different guys, would you want that person to talk to you? That's what I was saying before. So if you're talking, that's just, you're being honest and you're being authentic and you're being clear. But if you're going to be talking to someone, if you're going to be talking for someone for marriage, then you need to be very specific and your intentions need to be clear, especially in the religion, which I am not an expert in, so I cannot speak of.
You are an expert on relationship coaching, and I actually, because it's Ramadan and I got really excited to introduce you, I forgot to tell all the attendees about BeyondChai, and basically BeyondChai is a platform that connects single Muslims for marriage, and you have already been witnessing some of the tips and techniques that Rebekah, our relationship coach, has, and these are some of the great things about our service. We have relationship coaching, we have image consulting, and we have matchmakers that will work one-on-one with you to help you navigate through this journey. We're all here to support you. And on that regard, I wanted to ask Rebekah, since you have been with BeyondChai for almost about 6 months, what is the biggest piece of advice that you would give to someone as far as really starting an early on relationship and communication? What do you think is that one thing that keeps coming up with your clients that you feel like, man, if I could just communicate this, it would make things so much easier for everybody? Do you have that one thing? Trust. Okay.
You being your authentic self. If you start out with being who you are, There's no change. I see a lot of young ladies come in and young men come on with a certain facade, and then they need to break that down and say, okay, I'm just going to be me and be comfortable in my skin, and this is who I am. Because at the end of the day, that's who you're going to be when you get married.
So whether that's being, authentic about, hey, texting is not going to work for me. I need for that connection to be on a phone call, communicating.
Yes.
Authenticity to the other person. Okay. That's excellent. Does anyone have any more questions and answers? Because I know I have a lot of questions, so I will take this opportunity to ask Rebekah questions, but I would want to give everyone that's been viewing the opportunity to also ask questions. And so while they come up with that, I want to ask you, Rebekah, what do you think is, initially you're getting to talk to someone to build trust and some sort of connection. When do you start talking about some of the more things that are a little bit more complicated? Like, for example, if you are divorced or if you have kids, or some of these things that are a part of you, but you're not sure when to necessarily bring that up. So what conversation would that be occurring in?
So when the first part of communicating with someone is getting to know them getting to know you, the personality, exchanging personality styles, exchanging communication styles, because you got to know that about each other. How does this person communicate? What's this person's personality? Does it work? Does it match? So the first few weeks, maybe the first month, you're figuring each other out. Mm-hmm. And then when they're like, okay, wait a minute, I really think that we might be a good match. Both of you agree on that. If at that point, the point you say, I think it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be 3 months of getting to know each other, of sharing stories and daily life stuff, and okay, I'm comfortable with this person. When that moment says, okay, this person could be my future spouse, that's when okay, we need to talk about some serious stuff. And, you have to talk about intimacy. You have to talk about affection. You have to talk about children, how you want to raise children. You have to talk about the history, because that person that you're with, they have the right to know your background and not baggage, but what you bring, what your anchors that bring you into because those things that you bring are your anchors.
So what's really interesting is that you said in a week, in a month, 2 months. So there's not really a set time.
It's when you feel like you're a match with that person, when you say, okay, this person could be my spouse. I can give my example of my experience. After 4 weeks, my husband and we decided we were connected, and he's like, let's do the contract. Because he didn't want to, he was very careful about respect, and that meant so much to me. And so he's like, let's do the marriage contract, and then we'll go from there. And that was kind of weird because I'm, American, but I loved that he respected me enough to do that. But it was after 4 weeks. But I do know another couple that it's been a progressive thing over 6-7 months. And at the 6-month mark, they said, okay, this is something, we're going to go down this road. And then they started talking about the more, bigger issues. So it's all on your own timing. It's not supposed to be forced. It's when you're comfortable. And because I had been divorced, I was comfortable talking about things. I was saying, okay, this is me. I knew I had to be my authentic self because of experience. Because if you go into it without being that, being your authentic self, you're not going to get anywhere. And I knew that this time, after all the experience I'd gone through, that no matter what, I was going to keep that authenticity. That was so important. So there is no time. It's like, okay, when you're looking at that person and there's more than a friendship, there's like, okay, I'm attracted to this person. I think that there's a match. That's when you say, okay, are you ready to talk about some more serious topics? And that's when that person says yes, because you both have to be on the same page. That's when you start talking about those things.
Okay, I have one other question here, and it kind of talks about the question I posed. And basically, Sadia is asking, at what point should you, so for example, if we're using the divorce, example, if you are a divorcee and trying to connect to someone for marriage purposes, at what point should you be disclosing that information? And would it be considered withholding information if you didn't share that in your initial communications? And that could be whether divorcee, it could be for any other, topics that might be a little bit more personal, but the other person would need to know. So what are your thoughts on that?
In psychology, in the research that I've read, you cannot hide that. That's such a huge thing. It's such a huge topic. Being divorced, you have to, that's being authentic. You've been married before. Like there's no, and especially if you have children, you cannot, I think it should be known right away. Hey, I was divorced, and you don't have to tell the reasons why right away. That's a deeply personal situation with each person. It's case by case basis, because some of those reasons are deeply personal, and that's between the person that you match with and yourself. And when that time comes, when they need to know, and when you're ready to tell them, but that needs to be, that's part of being authentic and being truthful. You can't, it is hiding. It is part of who you are.
No, I agree. I think that's really, a lot of people really struggle with that. So that is something that should be in the first couple of conversations for sure, right?
Yeah. Because otherwise it will jeopardize trust in the future.
Okay. So that would be considered withholding information. And as you've been mentioning, communication is all about trust. So building up that trust, and also maybe making sure that they are a good fit for you, because if they feel like, oh, that's something that they can't handle, then there's no point in wasting time. Okay. Wow. Well, this has been a really, I've learned so much in this session, and I really appreciate all your feedback. I know on the Q&A side, Nawaz was thanking you for your feedback as well. So we're at the end of your webinar. It's 2:00, and before you guys go, I want to offer you this really, really awesome service. You've heard Rebekah speak, and you can actually now get I'm trying to send you the offer. Okay. So on your screen, you're going to get a little pop-up offer. So it's a 20% off package with Rebekah. She's an amazing relationship coach with BeyondChai, so please take advantage of that. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. So take care. Assalamu alaikum, and I hope you'll join us for the next webinar, which is going to be next month. We'll be sending out an email, and that's going to be with our image consultant. So I think that's going to be a really amazing session talking about how to attract your match with the right vibes. So thank you. Appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum.